This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. Ad-free listening on Amazon Music is included with your Prime membership. Just head to amazon.com/ad-free news podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads. Enjoy thousands of Acast shows ad-free for Prime subscribers. Some shows may have ads.
When you're ready to pop the question, the last thing you want to do is second-guess the ring. At BlueNile.com, you can design a one-of-a-kind ring with the ease and convenience of shopping online. Choose your diamond and setting. When you find the one, you'll get it delivered right to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code LISTEN to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code LISTEN at BlueNile.com for $50 off your purchase. BlueNile.com, code LISTEN.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Nauru. Ever heard of it? Well, in this edition of the food programme, we go to a South Sea island, a dream of paradise, though in this case, not quite. But it's an island that, through its struggles, could teach us all something we need to learn fast about obesity. Coconut fish, the children chant, a traditional meal on the tiny Pacific island of Nauru.
That's ren and kiwi. In Nauru, we call that ren and kiwi. In English, it's coconut fish. It's a fish marinated with coconut oil and lime with onion on it.
Fish, coconut, lime, sounds good. I'm Sheila Dillon, and in today's food programme, we're going to the tiniest island in Micronesia, Nauru, the world's smallest republic with some very big health problems.
A small island, but her people are big, very big. Nauru is the fattest country on Earth.
An obesity crisis amongst Pacific Islanders.
Nauru's become an object of fascination, with articles and online videos commenting on the so-called country that ate itself.
So they start gobbling up the Western food, and they wind up in this kind of shape.
Despite having a speed limit of 25 miles an hour, a police chief once ordered a Lamborghini, only to realise he was too fat to fit inside.
But a lack of activities on the island and a passion for eating unhealthy food has led the people here to be quite lazy. Nauru holds the crown for being the most obese country per capita at 71%, and it certainly shows.
That kind of condescending commentary has made it hard to make this programme. People there are understandably reluctant to talk to journalists. It's also been hard for scientists to understand the complex causes of that obesity, one that's now affecting huge parts of the world. So let's start off with the basics. The Republic of Nauru is an island nation home to roughly 10,000 people. It's 35 miles south of the equator in the Pacific Ocean, about 2,000 miles northeast of Australia. In 1968, it became an independent country after 2 decades of a UN trusteeship administered by Australia, the UK, and New Zealand. If you've ever heard about Nauru, it's probably because it's home to Australia's controversial offshore regional processing centre, where would-be immigrants to Australia are detained. But processing immigrants for big powers is only the latest in a long history of exploitation by the big powers. Daryl Tom was born on the island, and he's now retired from working in the phosphate mining industry.
Well, it's an island with 14 districts, and it's 12 square miles around. The fishermen here, they go out every morning. They come back before 11, 12 noon, and they sell their fish. And whatever they catch they have, they give that to the customer. When it's special occasion, we eat pork, black nori, chicken, and ham from overseas. Black nori, it's a bird. Nauruan catch black nori with a long rod. At the point of the rod, there is a net. So we played a recorder, bird noise, this bird will come around to where the tape recorder is being playing.
Calls of noddy birds are played from speakers on the ground, and when the birds fly above in response, they're caught in the nets. It's kind of like fishing, but in the sky.
You whip it down, you pull it down with the net. Black noddy are very delicious. It's a food Nauruan can't miss out on a party occasion, things like that.
Picturesque, but locally caught fish and noddy birds are now a tiny part of the diet on Nauru. What people eat here is almost all imported and rarely fresh, because fresh is costly.
In Nauru, everything comes in the form of a tin, canned tin, including soft drinks and all that. Vegetables here on Nauru are all imported from Australia, and some we bought from Fiji. So first come, first serve. We bought them if they are available, and if they are not available, then we have to wait for the next opportunity. This shipping cycle from Brisbane to Nauru would take about 10 days. In Nauru, the other option is the airline, because they bring in fresh fruit, fresh veggies. We have our own air fleet. There's two freighter, and this freighter, they come in twice a week.
Dr. Amy McLennan is a medical anthropologist and research affiliate at the University of Oxford. She spent a year living and working in Nauru as part of her work on understanding obesity.
My experience in Nauru was both a wonderful one, because people of Nauru are excellent, and life there is certainly a joyful experience, but it's also tempered with the fact that I have seen people who have had diabetes-related amputations or blindness at an incredibly young age. I have been to one funeral a week for the period of a year in a population of only 10,000 people, because that is the lived reality of these non-communicable diseases further down the tracks.
Over 60% of Nauru's adults are obese. That's double the rate in the UK. And diabetes type 2 affects 66% of people aged 55. As Amy McLennan says, life-changing sickness at an early age is now the norm on the island.
The government have introduced a department in the hospital where people will usually go for diabetic tests and all that. They've been giving some guidelines on how to protect themselves against this disease, diabetics.
Daryl was the one person on Nauru who agreed to speak to us after that gross online coverage of the island's health problems. It seems obesity is a subject few people want to talk about. Most of our calls and emails, including to the government, went unanswered. Dr. Amy McLennan understands why.
So we start to see a number of headlines about Nauru being the world's fattest nation in the early 2000s. And that's really harmful. That is really harmful. That is said with a certain amount of moral judgment, and certainly the people that I spoke to on Nauru reflected that was something that they found quite stigmatizing.
A major turning point in life on Nauru came at the beginning of the 20th century, when Western powers discovered the island had big deposits of phosphate, a key ingredient of chemical fertilizer. This is a BBC News Round report from 1980, when the phosphate industry was booming.
Well, finally tonight to a remarkable story about a tiny island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's called Nauru, and as Jim Biddulph discovered, it's become very rich for an unusual reason.
These children are growing up in one of the smallest, richest and strangest countries in the world. It's small because the Republic of Nauru is an island of only 8 square miles, sweltering in the Pacific a few miles from the equator. It's rich because, with a native population of 4,000, it earns more than £10 million a year. Strange because it gets that money digging bird droppings. The machines pick the ages-old bird droppings from between the rocks and the coral pinnacles, stripping the island bare. The phosphate will all be gone in 20 years, leaving nothing but a barren rock behind. This is Jim Biddulph on the island of Nauru.
Amy McLennan again.
The island, if you like, is about 20 square kilometres. It's more or less a circle, and it looks a bit like a kind of hat. So it's got a raised part in the middle and a rim that's quite flat around the edge. And the raised part in the middle throughout history has been arable land. So there's a topsoil which is quite rich with the phosphate underneath it, as it were. And what we see during the colonial period is rapid efforts by the colonial powers who have an interest in mining to extract phosphate to turn into fertiliser to create kind of vibrant farms across the southeastern swathes of Australia. They have a really strong interest in encouraging people to move off of the arable land in the centre of the island, which also contains the highest grade phosphate, and onto the rocky rim of the island. Really, in order to mine the land, they need people to leave the land and to leave the arable land. So changing people's diets and encouraging people to eat foods which can be acquired without the use of the farmable land. So colonial authorities are very quick to import foods and to educate the people of Nauru on how to go about eating them. We start to see Australian food producers which are caught up in regulation in Australia, not caught up in regulation in Nauru. So they're able to move goods to places like Nauru and across the Pacific that they're not allowed to sell in Australia for health reasons.
So, Nauru's arable land was destroyed to make fertiliser, to grow crops elsewhere. Then it was left with little choice but to import food, especially highly processed food, which could survive long boat journeys, often imported from the countries that had taken its phosphate. A long way from the future Nauruans were once promised. Even in 1962, it was understood that phosphate mining would have a big impact on life on the island.
Although the phosphate industry will continue for 30 or 40 years on Nauru, preparations are being made now for the future of the Nauruan people.
This film was made by the Australian Department of Territories and is held at the National Film and Sound Archive of Australia.
Australia has offered them a permanent home within her own shores. The final choice will lie with the Nauruans themselves. Wherever they may decide to settle, the future lies with the children. They will benefit from the preparations being made now. Their prospects are bright. Their future is secure.
Those bright prospects and secure future were formulated by the Australian government into an offer to relocate the entire population to a small island off the coast of Queensland. Cheaper, it seems, to move an entire nation to Australia than make good the colossal damage done by phosphate mining. But in 1964, the Nauruans said no. They did not want to become part of Australia. Phosphate mining makes Nauru a special case amongst the 2,100 islands of Micronesia. But as far as obesity and public health disasters go, it's just an extreme example of a general trend in many Pacific islands. On almost every island, diets shifted over the last half-century, from fish and locally grown fruit and vegetables to ultra-processed foods, the foods we've talked about often on the food programme, high in sugar, salt, oils and fats, and all the additives that give shelf life and that super give me more palatability. In addition, Nauru and many other islands have been the dumping grounds for bits of meat not considered edible in the United States, Australia, or New Zealand, such as turkey tails and mutton flaps, meats, if that's the right label, that are about 50% fat. Dr. Nicola Hawley is an associate professor at Yale University School of Public Health. She's studied chronic diseases in the Pacific Islands.
Pacific Island nations lead the way on any global obesity chart that you look at in any given country. Probably you're looking at least half of the adult population having obesity, which we define as having a body mass index or a weight for height that is above this 30 unit that the World Health Organization recommends.
It had been suggested that Pacific Islanders could be genetically predisposed to weight gain. According to Dr. Nicola Hawley, the evidence is mixed.
There's a lot of work still to do in the space of understanding the role that genetics plays. But whatever role it does play, it is in the minority compared to these more social and structural factors that Pacific Island nations are facing. Those things, those environmental factors, are also obviously much easier to address than what is going on at the DNA levels.
Samoa first introduced a sugar tax in 1984, with several more Pacific nations following suit in the early 2000s, long before most European nations. In 2007, Nauru introduced a levy of 30% on imported sugar, confectionery, and carbonated soft drinks, but the effectiveness of the levy in Nauru is unclear.
The Pacific has actually led the way on several occasions in food policy. So they've made really bold moves to try and support the health of their populations by banning imports of incredibly fatty meats that, for example, the US does not consider the tail of a turkey to be fit for human consumption. So they're not sold in the US, but they are shipped to the Pacific on a regular basis. Samoa in 2011 wanted to join the World Trade Organization to be able to export their own local coconut products in particular. And one of the conditions of World Trade Organization membership is that you don't have any kind of ban against any other member nation. And so they had this turkey tail ban that was specific to the US. And so the US petitioned the World Trade Organization. They would not agree to Samoa's joining until Samoa dropped that ban on turkey tails. And so they've had to do some things like increase taxes to try and maintain a situation where that is relatively low in the food supply, but they had to give up the ban. There's such a drive in the Pacific Islands to do better for their people. Like, at the center of every Pacific culture is people and children in particular. So there is so much motivation in those countries to do something about this problem. And not only do something about it, but be world leaders.
About 12 years ago, I wrote a cookbook documenting the cuisines of the various islands of the South Pacific where I was brought up. And that has led to a lot of other work in the South Pacific and really to a food movement that I'm kind of steering, often without really knowing what I'm doing.
Robert Oliver is a celebrity chef, author and TV presenter. Originally from New Zealand, he grew up in Fiji and Samoa, where as a child he learned to love the traditional Pacific food he ate every day.
There are distinct cuisines in every island. Fiji is different from Samoa, is different from Vanuatu, but we tend to share many of the same crops. And we share coconut, and we share the ocean. So there's a lot of seaweeds and fish. And so about 30 years ago, this started to go a bit off track. And it was really about the emergence and the kind of domination of ultra-processed foods, this tsunami of marketing, which is often quite untruthful. So there's a real shift in the way people started to eat.
Robert is executive director and host of Pacific Island Food Revolution, a lively cooking show that includes advice on healthy living and looking after the environment, focused on improving public health through the pleasures of good food.
I was cast on a big show called My Kitchen Rules. I was cast as a judge on it. I was always very cynical about reality TV, by the way, because I just thought it was trash. And then when I was on the show, I realized how powerful it was because it's got people cooking and talking about food and interested in food. And I was like, well, if I brought that kind of design, that model to the Pacific and designed it to be addressing the health issues and showcasing a lot of the work that already ministries of health are already doing.
On the next Pacific Island Food Revolution.
It hasn't been an easy road to get here.
We have reached the ultimate showdown.
And I can feel the Vanuatu weight on my shoulder.
Shamim and Manasa, the Fijian foodies.
One more mountain to climb. We want to reach the top.
Face Knox and Leo, the island boys from Vanuatu.
It's what we both dreamt of.
This clash of cuisines will be an epic battle. Who will be named champions? The grand final of Pacific Island Food Revolution.
you've partnered recently with UNICEF for a children's cooking show, I gather. So tell me a bit about that.
So UNICEF, they saw that we were reaching huge numbers of people, and they came to us and said, let's partner working on what kids eat. And so we did a YouTube series, which was kids cooking simple recipes, things that they could cook themselves.
Here is the moment Team Vanuatu are announced as the winners at a watch party. More like the reaction to a winning goal in a World Cup final than the conclusion of a cooking show.
Team Vanuatu.
If you look at the big MasterChef, etc. shows, they tend to do very elaborate dishes that are quite hard to make at home. And we wanted to make sure that we did dishes that integrated into people's lives. People would get the recipes and think, oh, I can do that. And then it would happen. This is where change will happen. We did an episode around a quick recipe that an expectant mother could eat that was nutritious. And then one that also she could feed a baby. Those kind of things don't usually appear in cooking shows, right? But they do appear in people's lives. These issues do come up. And then in season 3, we did an episode. There's a really amazing group in Samoa called SWAG, which is the Samoan Woman Association of Growers. They don't just farm, they also make products that go to the market. And so the challenge I gave the contestants is make me a product that would be a good item at a SWAG market. And so that's when the baby food one came up. The Tongan contestants themselves said, there's no Pacific-based commercial baby food in the supermarkets, etc. And we see that as an opportunity to give our kids a good start in life. And so they did 3 types of kind of puree. One was a pawpaw and boo is green coconut. Second one was kumala, which is sweet potato and ripe banana. And the last one was pumpkin, carrot, and vundi, which is ripe plantain.
My beloved mom passed away from diabetes. I want to encourage all my families out there that we should try and eat healthy.
One Cooking Revolution contestant living up to Robert's hopes for the programme. Cooking good food as the road to health. It seems finger-wagging and nutritional advice works no better on South Sea Islands than it does in the UK, or, in fact, anywhere else. Although diet really is a crucial factor in rising obesity levels, there's more to the story.
We've been trying to address obesity, nutrition-related disease in Nauru for over 50 years now, with all sorts of interventions, and we have not made a significant difference.
Well, the significant difference, it seems to be that everything has been made worse. I mean, you say in your paper, the assumption broadly made by practitioners of nutritional science is that better scientific evidence will lead to better nutritional advice, and better nutritional advice will lead to improved nutritional health outcomes. But that's not happened.
No, absolutely. And do you know what? I have puzzled on that for the better part of how many years since I've written that paper? 5 or 6. And I think something else that I've been puzzling about at the same time is I went to Nauru and worked there quite a long time to study how food and health and life had changed over the arc of the second half of the 20th century when we see a rapid obesity rise. And a couple of things really surprised me. So one of them was that food and diet had changed really relatively little across that period of time in the nation. We see a lot of changes much earlier on, but in that period, not so much. And the other thing was that a lot of other things stood out. Social and financial stresses. The people kept telling me the woven mat of social relationships was becoming frayed. We see chronically poor air quality from mining practices. When you are in houses or around the island, people will joke, look, it's Nauru snowing again. Now, it doesn't snow on Nauru. It's only just south of the equator. It's a balmy 27 degrees every day and humid. But there would be this fine layer of dust and white across any surface, across my glasses, across the floor. You could see if someone had walked across the floor. And this was the dust from the phosphate processing, the drying that happens on the island. So one of the things we know from the COVID-19 pandemic and more focus on air quality is that air quality or air pollutants are inflammatory agents as well. In many respects, the framing of obesity as an inflammatory condition fits the Nauruan example better than the framing of obesity as a diet and exercise behavioural problem.
You've described this extremely high diabetes and obesity rate on Nauru. Who's responsible?
You've got colonial authorities, the people and governments behind the companies that mined Nauru, the international organisations like the League of Nations and the UN who permitted that kind of destruction, the fertiliser makers and retailers, the farmers who use the fertiliser to grow crops in lands not suited to the sort of plants they wanted to grow, and by extension, the people who consume the food, and that includes people like me today. The food industry and investors who profit from ultra-processed foods that have filled the gap in the market in Nauru now that they cannot grow their own foods. And it's easy to take from all that obesity is a bit of a hopeless case, that there are too many diffuse causes to blame. And I suppose for me, that's one reason why I hesitate to engage with the question of who's to blame for poor nutritional health, and instead try and think in terms of who can help improve nutritional health, because I think it opens new possibilities for intervention rather than just a kind of confused list of, well, everybody's a bit to blame. If we think about obesity as a set of individual behaviours, which we've done until very recently, then we focus on intervening in what people eat and what they do. So we educate, we give instructions and so on. And in a context where you cannot clearly access things like fresh foods or vegetables, then education is frustratingly impossible to follow, which is the case often in places like Nauru. If we reframe obesity as being a result of multiple exposures to multiple inflammatory agents, from ultra-processed foods right through to social stresses or particulate matter in the air, then we can think differently about who's responsible for reducing that exposure and who's responsible for protecting citizens. So it gives us a different way in, if you like.
A different way into a problem now affecting hundreds of millions of people all over the world. Yet it seems we're all still caught in a trap of valuing only short-term financial gains. Businesses from mining to farming to food processing still don't add to their balance sheets the real cost to lives and the natural world. They're outside our economic calculations. Nauru has been a canary in the world's coal mine for a long time. We just didn't notice the bird was gasping for air. The island gained its independence over 50 years ago, and it's almost 2 decades since the bulk of Nauru's phosphate deposits ran out. Yet the legacy of mining and decisions taken by colonial leaders still shape lives. But scientists have learned something.
What we know now, particularly in the last 10 years with an explosion of research around climate change, around social stress, around exposure to chemicals in our environment, has really increased our understanding of the causes of obesity and taken it much more beyond that individual level look at calories in and calories out. There's a lot of assumption that obesity is an individual choice. It's a result of decisions that one person makes about what they eat, how active they are. But actually, none of those decisions occur in a vacuum. And we have to take into account the deep history in the Pacific and how that impacts what is on our plate on any given day and the choices that we feel like we can make around food.
Thanks for listening. Producer Karis Wall and I hope you enjoyed it.
The Post Office Horizon scandal has shocked Britain.
Post Office IT scandal, which has had so much publicity, hasn't it, over the last...
This is a scandal of historic proportions.
I've been following the story for more than a decade, hearing about the suffering of sub-postmasters like Joe Hamilton and Alan Bates.
It was just horrendous. The whole thing was horrendous.
I was told you can't afford to take on Post Office.
And about their extraordinary fight for justice. What was motivating you?
Well, it was wrong what they did.
Listen to the true story firsthand from the people who lived it in the Great Post Office Trial from BBC Radio 4 with me, Nick Wallace. Subscribe on BBC Sounds.
Get the best workout with the best-kept secret in fitness. Hydro, the state-of-the-art at-home rower. Hydro engages 86% of your muscles, delivering the ultimate full-body workout in just 20 minutes. From advanced to beginner, Hydro has over 4,000 classes that are shot all over the world and are taught by Olympians and world-class athletes. For a 30-day risk-free trial with free standard shipping, go to hydro.com and use code ROW500 to save up to $500. That's HYDROW.com, code ROW500.
Tired of ads barging into your favorite news podcasts? Good news. Ad-free listening on Amazon Music is included with your Prime membership. Just head to amazon.com/ad-free news podcasts to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads. Enjoy thousands of Acast shows ad-free for Prime subscribers. Some shows may have ads.